Good afternoon and welcome to the final concurrent session of the day, Quality Evaluation and Feedback Using Rubrics. Our presenter today is Michael Heron of Purdue University Global. Michael Heron graduated from the University of Northern Iowa with a master's in mathematics education. He has taught for 26 years, 7 in secondary education and 19 at Purdue University Global. If you have any questions for the presenter during the session, please feel free to enter those into the Q&A section at the bottom of the Zoom room screen, and we will address them at the end of the talk. On that note, I will hand it over to our presenter.
Thank you, Sarah, for that warm introduction. I want to thank everyone for joining us during the session, during the conference that we are here with. I want to thank Hawks for having this conference for us all to gather and be able to learn a lot of different things about teaching in general. What I would like to do is just share some things about rubrics and how to get some nice feedback from those. And hopefully this will work. There we go. Awesome. Okay. So here are just some outcomes that I am looking for you to be able to achieve today. We'll learn about the importance of expectations being conveyed to the students, learn the importance of a good rubric, and see one way on how to generate some quality feedback quickly to match the rubric, because we all know that feedback is very important. So something just to think about right now is, some reasons to convey the expectations to our students. Number one, students are more successful. Think about your own days when you're going to college and you were told to do a particular project. And in this project, it's very, very vague. You don't know what to do. You really don't know what the outcome is that the professor has. It says, go do this thing. And you say, okay. And we understand as the people on the other side of things as to why we do that. We do that in order to give students more opportunities to, be creative and submit something that isn't the same as everybody else. But at the same time, you have these students who didn't meet what you were hoping for them to do. And it's for those students that we really want to make sure that they have those more specific guidelines. And another thing to think about here is that everybody is clear on what those expectations are. Here's the list. Here's what has to be done. This is how you're going to be graded. This much of your grade is coming from that part of your assignment, this much on this other part of your assignment, and things like that. And that way, there's no question as to why points are awarded or deducted depending on that particular situation. Next, if you have a good rubric, you're going to have a lot less questions about what is expected. And I don't know about you, but if I can explain to my students and show them quickly on a rubric what's to go on, I don't have tons of emails flooding in at me saying, is it okay if I do this? Do I have to have references? Do I have to have charts, graphs? Do I have time to review their assignment or their project before they officially submit it to make sure that everything is there? A good rubric should be able to tell the students that they have met that particular outcome. Next, less stress. Because if the students know exactly what to expect, they're not going into the situation saying, should I do this? Should I not do that? They know what's going on. They know what they need to do. They produce that product for you, and it'll be a good situation and learning experience for everybody. And last but not least, improve consistency across instructors. Okay, so I'm not sure about where you are teaching at, but we have many instructors who teach the same course. And because they're teaching the same course in their own ways, I mean, we here at Purdue Global, we do have assignments that are the same, but there could be some perceived differences between me and another instructor if we aren't using the same rubric. I might grade something a little bit more heavily than somebody else, but with a good rubric, whether I'm grading it or somebody else is grading it, we should be very close to the same scores. And so if students from different courses compare how they did, then they can say, oh, okay, well, yeah, that makes sense when they look at their projects and the scores that they got. Okay, so what is that power of a rubric? Well, when I was doing some research into this idea of that rubric, Feldman had some interesting things to say. One of them, it describes a piece of work or performance will be evaluated, the specific criteria, as well as what constitutes distinctive gradations of quality for every criterion. And Zora, a high school student, perfectly captures this idea, saying, notice, this is the student saying it, not the teacher. A rubric is almost like an instruction manual. So it tells you what to do, how to do, and how you're going to be evaluated and what's going to be the outcome when I submit this project. Okay. He also stated in this article, we might even think of rubrics and proficiency scales as installing a checks and balances system in our classroom, because whether you look at this or the student looks at it, you should both be able to see why a particular score or amount of credit was awarded on an assignment. And something else to think about when you are working with rubrics is that wording matters. If all you're doing is saying the negatives, you forgot this, you forgot that, you forgot the other thing, intentionally or not, you're in a way kind of putting down the student. And when you're being put down, you get a negative mindset. And instead, what you should do is at least do a mix in there, saying, hey, you did this part well, you had this other part you did okay, on this other part maybe you need a little bit of work. And by doing that, it's easier to get the student to really take that feedback that you give them based upon your rubric a lot better. Because who wants to be told they're doing poorly all the time? I know I don't. And so, when I talk with my supervisor, for example, she always makes sure to include what things I've done well and then maybe those opportunities. And that's the way we should be treating our students. What did they do well? And what are some opportunities they have to have improved this assignment and to do that on future assignments. And there's some 3 little phrases down there that you can think about incorporating when you're giving your feedback. With support, the student is able to do this. The student makes an attempt to do this. Show some signs of like improvement. So, you're phrasing it in a way that makes the student say, okay, I have some knowledge, but I need to maybe improve upon that knowledge that I have. All righty. Now, I'm not going to say that rubrics are the end all and end all of all things for grading. There are some things that can happen when you have rubrics. First of all, it's based on a general description of an assessment category. Students are assumed to be able to look at their assignment next to the professor's box ratings and agree that their assignment falls into that category. If it's too general, students may not see it in the same light that you have. Especially if you're using a rubric over multiple assignments as opposed to a specific assignment. Another problem stems from a limited column space. So if you are writing this on a piece of paper or even typing it in onto a Word document. There's a limited amount of space for you to give a good description of why you have chosen this score of an A or a B or something of that nature. So depending on what you're doing, maybe you need to do something a little bit different with that rubric. And last but not least, they're used merely as a tool to assign a final grade. And that's in my eyes, not necessarily in the eyes of the student. And so you say, well, the rubric says this, I say this is where it's at the rubric, and that's it, without really giving a whole lot of feedback in there. And that could be a potential issue with a grading rubric as well. Okay, now, what kind of feedback can you use with the rubrics? Okay, one is you only use the rubric, meaning, you could either just click on it, you circle it if it's a paper copy that you're giving them, and that's it. You don't tell them anything else. You just circle that spot saying, this is the grade location where this assignment falls. Now, that's okay. At least they know where you're looking at, but it really doesn't give a whole lot of information to the student on where they went right and where they went wrong, which is why you may choose to do individualized comments. For example, you're reading something and you just kind of type off the side, okay, these are some good points that you have inside of this article or this assignment, and that's great. But the problem with that is that you're retyping it every time, or even worse, if you're handwriting it every time. And when you're doing that, it takes a lot of time. I mean, it's really good. Students really appreciate those type of comments, but it does take a lot of time on the instructor side of things. And if you have a lot of students like I do, it could take, several hours to go through and just grade one particular assignment for one class by giving those more detailed type feedback comments that the students would like. Now, what you could potentially do is create what's called a comments database. Okay, and this creation of a comments database minimizes the effort of recreating comments over and over, and it allows the comments and feedback to be refined so that they're more carefully constructed to be fair, encouraging, and consistent. Okay, so in other words, if you see yourself writing the same thing multiple times over like I do, you forgot to do this particular part, and you write that over and over and say, okay, well, that's great, but, my mindset is it's taking a long time. You forgot to do this, is very quick. Instead, I could rephrase that into something a little bit more positive, saying you accidentally forgot to do this part of the assignment, and that's why your grade is lowered by 5 points, or whatever that happens to be. I wrote it out nicely. I can just copy it and I can paste that into the feedback. I don't have to worry about spelling. I'm not worried about extra time writing or typing. It's just going to be there ready for me. And it's a more positive message, in my opinion. Now, of course, there's got to be some benefits to rubrics. Number one, reduce time in grading assignments. I will tell you, when we first started using rubrics a lot at Purdue Global, I was a little bit skeptical about the actual time being decreased. And actually, it has become that way because I get familiar with the various rubrics that I use. Like, okay, I can go through, I could read an assignment and say, based off of the assignment, I'm circling this criteria, that criteria, this other criteria. That's where I'm at. And then I can give my feedback pretty quickly because I'm familiar with that particular format. So it does actually speed it up because I know exactly what I'm looking for and I can take that mental note about what's going on. Also, even though we don't have these at Purdue Global, you could potentially pass this on to a competent teaching assistant. So even though you aren't the one grading, a good rubric, whether you're the one assessing this or this teaching assistant that's there because they're knowledgeable, they could also assess and still get that same or extremely similar results when you are going through and doing that grading. And last but not least, increasing validity and accuracy of grading. That way, whether I'm assessing that first student when I'm in a really good mood, or that last student where I may be tired, I'm still using that same judgment throughout that whole process. At least it's a lot easier to, have that same judgment. Otherwise, things kind of, sometimes people get, really good moods and it's like, oh, people are doing bad, and that can impact your grading. We don't want that to happen. All righty. Now, today I just want to look at and think about just 3 types of rubrics. One of them is identifies the criteria and how to score. It's not broken down. Another one is identifying criteria at a specific level, and the criteria are different. And we have the same criteria in all non-zero point levels, and a different quantity is met in each of those levels. Here's the first one. You identify the criteria and how to score. It's not broken down. Okay, so this is just a nice little example. So here I have the criteria on the left-hand side, and it says identified at least 3 data sets. So that's what I'm looking as the instructor to take place. And I even say, there's going to be 5 points per data set, up to a maximum of 15 points. So everybody knows, how many points are possible, what the expectation is, and how to get a particular score. Now, the reason that it has like up to a maximum of 15 points is because let's say you didn't do that and a student identifies, say, 20 data sets, and all you said was 5 points per data set. The student would say, well, I should get 100 points because it was 5 points per data set. And that's why you'd want to have that cap on there so students can't argue part. And you can see a similar thing happening lower. Okay, where you have some bar charts, how many standard deviations are there, etc. But it's telling you what's being graded and how it's going to be graded with that maximum score, so everybody is clear on that expectation. Now, here's another type of rubric that you can be looking at and using. It identifies the criteria in specific levels, and the criteria are different. And this isn't just another way to think about it, not saying good, not saying bad, but just some way to look at it. So for example, for full credit, and then I teach math classes, so that's why it's kind of looking like a math type of assignment. The student attempted all their problems, they showed the work for all the problems, and they followed the assignment format. So it's very clear as to what the student had to have done to earn all 10 points. Now, if they didn't do that, let's say they didn't attempt all their problems, then we come over here, we look at, 5 points. Does the student at least fit in here? Attempted at least 50% of the problems, and then showed work for at least 50% of the problems. Now, notice the phrase in here, she was at least in there. So this way, if a student did attempt all the problems, okay, but they only showed work for, say, 75%, I can justify why it's a 5 as opposed to jumping down to the 0, because I don't want students to get 0 because a little bit was off. So you got to make sure that you have that phrasing in here to help out. And then that last part for 0 points, you attempted less than 50% of the problems. Notice it doesn't matter that you did or did not show work. If you didn't attempt at least 50%, you're not given any credit for this particular assignment. So it's very clear, very delineated, and it's easy to find a category for students to fit in when you are assessing their assignment. Another way that you can set up your rubric is here. We have the same criteria and all the non-zero point levels, and the quantity met is different. So for example, here, the two non-zeros are the 10 and the 5 points. And I'm looking at all the problems are attempted, and all attempted problems show work appropriate. So all the criteria met. There's only 2 of them, but that's okay. Then we have, all the problems are attempted and all attempted problems show appropriate work. That is, we're looking at one criteria. Notice that we're careful in here so that if a student maybe didn't do all the problems, there's still an opportunity for them to get some credit if they at least showed the work in the problem that they did do. Because if you said that attempted all problems and all problems show the appropriate work for your categories, okay, the only point possible, even though you have a 10, a 5, and a 0, really are just the 10 and the 0. So once again, when you are looking at this method, which is fine, you have to make sure there's a nice way to delineate this into those various categories that you have there, that either you, the student, or that TA can come in and assess it the same way. And then, in the 0 points, you just want to make sure that you've covered your bases. So either nothing was attempted, which obviously that should be a 0, or a student didn't meet the criteria to either earn 10 points or to earn 5 points based off of the rubric that's here. And it's very nice to have that criteria not met in there, because by doing that, students can say, okay, oh, I didn't get there. That's why I'm at the 0. And it's very clear as to why I'm in the 0, as opposed to, something else. Okay. Now, what I would like to do is see if I want to go back. I want to see if I can get the chat to show. Maybe if I do that, or the question and answer show. What I'd like to do is to have you take a look at that particular rubric. I'm going to share my screen again and see if you can identify those things that maybe you think are good items in that rubric, and maybe some items in there that you think should have some improvement. So a little bit of interaction and thinking about what's going on here. So I'm going to share the screen here again.
Would you like for us to turn on the chat so that way people can chat anything?
That would be great if you would. Thank you. Okay, now I'm just going to go from our current slide right here. Okay, so I'm just going to give you a little bit of time to look through this particular rubric. And like I said, identify some things that you like about this, and maybe some things that you think could use some improvement to help make it clear, not just for you, but then also for your students. I'll give you a couple minutes to think through this. And yes, please do put your responses inside the chat when you have some things that maybe you've identified that may need some improvement or what does work out well. We'll open up the chat here. I'm just making sure that you do not see the chat, correct? That I have on my screen, only the PowerPoint, Marissa?
That's correct. We can only see the PowerPoint.
Okay, and is the whole thing showing, or is there just a black spot where I have my chat showing?
No black spot. We can see the rubric to discuss.
Perfect. Thank you. I appreciate that.
You're so welcome.
Okay. Not seeing. Oh, there we go. Thank you, Carol. I appreciate that you put some feedback in there. I'll share that here in another minute or so, giving some other people to have some feedback as well on our rubric that we're evaluating. Another good point by Sarah. I'm going to go ahead and, I'll read that and think about that too. Scott's got a good valid point as well. And I think while people are now putting more things into the chat, we're just going to start thinking about those comments that have been made so far. And I'm not sure why I can't. Oh, there they are. Okay, very good. So the first person was Carol. I think, she says, if a student does not follow the prescribed format, but attempts the problems, there's no recognition that effort was made, as no points can be awarded based off of these criteria. Is that really what you really want to do? Okay. And if you look at that, I agree, that would be hard. Why you give them nothing because they didn't do that? I agree. That's a big issue. Exactly. And Sarah says you may need to define what you mean by relevant work. Okay. And so if a student is saying, I'm thinking about a math class, they have to show, every single one step at a time, that might be one situation, or, can you skip some steps? So, there has to be some clarity as to what relevant work is for people to be able to evaluate and think at this correctly. Yeah, exactly. As Scott's saying, there's a lack of clarity between 12 and 0 points. What if they're between? How do you get that? And I agree. So all these are very good points as to some issues that you can see in here. So let's kind of think about, let's look at the 20 points. Okay. Do we think that the 20.1 is set up okay if we have a clarity as to what relevant work is? Go ahead and pop in the chat. If you think 20 is okay. Okay, and if not, how would you change the 20 points to make it better? What would you like to see differently if you don't think the 20 is good? So either you like it, or maybe what kind of a change would you want? And while you're at it, since we're making those type of comments, think about the same thing for 16 and for 12. What would you like to do differently there as well to make it clearer? How would you change that up? Ah, better word choice. Yes, Marissa, more specific word choice, especially for the 20, since that's what the students are trying to aim for. I agree, because the students don't want to look at the 16 and the 12. They should be looking at the 20. So you make sure that you have good words that everybody understands. I agree with that. Okay. What about our 16 or our 12? What kind of improvement would you like to see there? Exactly. Have an example of what that prescribed format is, so everybody knows what's in there. Or you can have a bulleted list in there saying that the prescribed format has your name in the top right corner, the page, the problem numbers, etc. Just, a little list of those items, just so everybody knows what that is. And I'm just thinking about a comment made earlier. Would it be okay to drop the assignment followed the prescribed format off of the 16 and the 12? Do you think that would be easier for students to then gain some of that middle ground between the 20 and the 0? Let alone between the 12 and the 0, which is a pretty big gap, as was pointed out earlier. Do we think that that would be a helpful thing to do? Yes, Sarah says, yep, exactly. Yeah, and the 16 and the 12 are nearly identical. Okay. There's a little bit of difference, if you look at the more than half and less than half. So I have a question. What if the student attempted exactly half? Where does that go? Looking at my example, we got more than half, less than half. They did exactly half. As the instructor, I'm like, it doesn't go in 16 because it's not more, and it's not in 12 because it's not less. It's exactly in the middle. So what do? It's like, you gotta fix that wording. Exactly. Carol has a great suggested wording. Maybe 16 should say does half or more, but not all. So that makes a nice distinguishing point between the 20 and the 16. So it's very clear between, 20 and 16 for the student and for the instructor. Very good. How about the 0 points? Can you think of anything else that you would like to maybe add to the 0 point column that might make it clear as to why that's selected versus any of the others? And I'm just thinking about what we looked at today in our short discussion. Anything else you think should be in there besides did not attempt? For example, do you think it should say anything about plagiarism in there? Or that, they copied from another student, should that be in there? Or, yeah, or did not follow the directions exactly. Okay. Or they did the wrong assignment. It said to do the odds and they did the evens, which would be part of that following of the direction. So I agree, Mr. Or yeah, exactly. Scott says did not meet any criteria for 12 points. Yep. I agree. You could have that in there and it's very clear as to what's going on, because there is a clear distinguishing point, assuming there is, between 20, 16, and 12. You didn't get 12. That's why you got down to the 0. Very good. Is there anything else that anybody would like to add as a idea for improving this particular rubric? Exactly. Getting some points for attempting problems, but not meeting one the other two criteria. Yeah, that might be a nice way to improve this rubric as well, so that we can get some, points for the student without jumping directly from, that 20 down to the 0. Very good. Okay, I'm looking at our time and I appreciate this. I hope that you enjoyed that opportunity for us to think about and interact about something, because I always think it's more fun to think and interact than it is for me just to talk at people during a presentation. I mean, that's just the teacher in me, but that's how I like to do things. So thank you so much for that participation in this exercise. All righty. Now, I'd like just to move on and think about generating feedback for the rubrics. Okay, so what I have done is created a way for me to take these comments. I remember these common phrases or pieces of information I'd like to share with my students, and I create a spreadsheet to help me generate those. And what I have is a drop down to say, how did the students do on this criteria, that criteria, whatever. And it's using some if statements inside of Excel, and it's concatenating some sentences, making some feedback, puts it all together. And then I copy it and I paste it into Notepad, because if it comes directly from Excel, it just makes this hugely long line, and if you have like 5 or 6 sentences, it just goes on forever, and students don't want to scroll that out that far. But if you paste it into Notepad and from there paste it into a message box, at least for me in the online environment, it makes it a whole lot nicer for the students to see this little paragraph form that you're intending to have for them. So this is just a picture of what I use, and in here I have some very basic information, and I do this with all of my classes. I have my name, my contact information, and this is particular feedback is on discussion board grading. And so I just said, okay, either they participated or not. And if they don't participate, I would just have clicked on that drop down and said no. And there's some different pieces that I expect. So for example, we have the main post. Did they do the main post or didn't they? Quick yes, no. Same thing with those various tasks in there. They summarize a chosen claim, they stated a population parameter, they stated a null and alternate hypothesis, and they state if one-tailed or two-tailed test. And I'm just going through very quickly, say, yep, you did it. That's the completed work shown. If it was relevant, there we go. Yes or no. Were there any math errors in that particular task? Were there any content errors in that particular task? And on the right-hand side, what you're seeing are just those sentences, phrases pertaining to a particular task that's supposed to be done in our main post. So it's showing all that wonderful information. Then I can concatenate this into a nice little paragraph saying, hello, first name, where first name can be used in Brightspace. That's a platform that we are using. And it'll say, hello, excuse me, hello, Michael, hello, Sarah, hello, George, hello, whoever. And it just starts out saying, thank you for participating in the discussion. So that's the most important part right there, because you're thanking them for doing what they're supposed to be doing. So it makes them feel good. You're acknowledging that they were there doing what they're supposed to do. And then, it just goes down and through and says, yes, you addressed the main post. And then it says, you completed this task, and identifies the task with the appropriate work shown, etc. And the reason it says that is because those are the particular criteria that are set up in the rubric that I have to use when I'm grading the discussion posts. Do they have the appropriate work shown? So I'm asking that for all of them. Do they have any substantial math errors? Do they have any, content errors? And if they actually did it. So that's why each sentence in there says you completed this, or, if they didn't, just say you did not complete the task, and it would stop right there. And you can tailor that very quickly and easily as you see fit. All righty. So there are a few articles that I looked up and I use. And so here's my works cited page if you would like to do some additional research on rubrics. And I just want to open it back up to some questions, and let's just go ahead and use the Q&A location for that if you have any questions for me. And I think that we have about 3 minutes. Is that right, Marissa?
Yeah, we have a couple of minutes left. So if, like you mentioned, if anyone has any questions that they want to ask, feel free to go ahead and put those into the Q&A portion on the Zoom screen now. And I do want to say thank you, Michael, for all the valuable information that you've shared with us today. It was definitely really interesting to look at, and great to get involved and kind of answer questions and bounce that feedback off of each other. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to go ahead and chat those in. I will say that this is the final concurrent session of the day and of our conference. So on behalf of everyone at Hawks Learning, we want to thank you, as our presenter and our attendees for being part of our Innovative Educator Summit 2022. The recordings of this year's session will be provided in the coming days, and we will post a brief summary or survey in the chat just to get your thoughts on your overall experience at the summit. We love if you could take a minute to send us your feedback. And if you haven't already, don't forget to swing by the exhibit hall to say hello to the Hawks team. You can view a quick 5-minute demonstration and be entered to win the hourly giveaway. Your choice of a 6-month subscription to Audible, 1-year subscription to Disney Plus, or $100 Amazon gift card. And the booth will remain open until about 6 p.m. Eastern time today. And it looks like we don't have any questions at the moment. So thank you again, Michael, and thank you to everyone for joining us for our Innovative Educator Summit 2022.
Thank you all. Thank you for having me.